If We're Being Honest by The Queen of Wump on AO3. Chapter 6 The Boy Born with Nothing. Trigger warnings in this chapter include endeavor, child abuse, minor character death, domestic abuse. Also would like to read the endnote blurbs. Points at Totodeku. They're in love, Your Honor. 1A. Is absolutely devastated and furious at Endeavor. Shoto. Oh, they're mad at me, aren't they? This is all my fault. Shoto wasn't entirely sure about how to feel about this quirk. On one hand, it could be really annoying. When he normally would keep his mouth shut, it instead forced him to open it at the most inconvenient of times. Sure, he was a normally very blunt person, but he liked to think he was also a considerate person. This quirk was making him question that. However, this quirk was also the reason he was dating his crush, so points to the truth quirk. It was also the reason he now knew how much Izuku had struggled in the past. It was just like him to listen to Shoto talk about how horrible his upbringing had been, but still not say a word about his own. It was one of the things he loved about him. He was so caring and selfless when it came to others, but it was also one of the things he hated about him. He never cared about his own well-being. Shoto didn't believe in fate, but he knew that something had to have pushed them together. How else could he be so lucky to be able to love someone as amazing as Izuku? It didn't make any logical sense. Things didn't work out for Shoto Todoroki. Maybe this was all a cruel trick. They would live together after graduation, content with each other and the life that they would build, and it would be ripped from him just when he started to get used to being happy. Izuku could be fatally wounded in the line of duty, and he would be alone all over again, like he had never left the cold halls of his father's house. Or he could just realize how much of a mess he really was and just leave. And now, because of the other night, Shoto had even more fears to add to his ever-growing list. Izuku had been depressed and slightly suicidal. That was the thing he feared most now, that he would snuff out his own light when least expected. He would go back and relive his childhood 1,000 times over to keep that from ever happening. It also explained how self-sacrificing he was. Shoto shuddered at the thought. It was just that Izuku was so caring and compassionate and open all the time, truth quirk or not. It was endearing, the way he spoke his mind and encouraged everyone around him no matter what. He loved him for it, being so loving and inviting when he himself was used to being closed off for his own safety. Of course, with the truth quirk, it was more of an issue. That piece of trash can die for all I care. Especially when Endeavor was suddenly brought up in the dorms. In a more private setting, it would have made Shoto laugh. But now, with everyone staring at the two of them, and Izuku now looking at him with wide eyes, it just made him freeze in terror. Everyone was obviously shocked by the words that came out of the Greenette's mouth, as something so violent was usually not his go-to, and aimed at the number 2 hero, no less. They were in the middle of some Disney movie, but someone must have paused it because the room was dead silent. Izuku didn't seem to care. He was staring at Shoto in fear, like he would be mad at him or something. He could never see himself being truly angry with Izuku, but he understood why he would be. I'm so sorry, Izuku whispered, almost inaudible. Why would you say that about the number 1 hero? Sarah asked apprehensively. He saved so many people. Because he's the worst, Shoto answered for him, partially against his will. He's a complete fraud of a hero. What had Izuku said a few days ago? Something about how the quirk could be overloaded when too much information was being processed at once? Yeah, that was probably happening with everyone, because no one said a word. Every quirk had a weakness, after all. Too bad it was just such a stupid weakness and not something, to stop it altogether. Why is he a fraud? Uraraka asked eventually, sounding terrified by the sound of her own voice. Shoto felt his fists clench at his sides. He couldn't say it. He's abusive. He hurt my whole family, including me. He's the reason my brother's dead and my mother's in a mental hospital. He felt Izuku put a hand on his, and Shoto forced himself to unclench his own and take it. He hoped he hadn't accidentally drawn blood with his nails. I'm so sorry, Izuku whispered again. I didn't mean to. I don't blame you, he said, because it's okay would have been a lie. He didn't look at anyone's faces as he spoke. That would have been way too much to handle. Not that this wasn't already too much. I think I'm with Bakugo on this whole quirk thing. It's the worst. He let go of his boyfriend's hand and stood, his head still down. I don't feel comfortable talking about this right now. I'm going to my room. Izuku, you can come if you want. He wasn't even 2 steps away when he felt a hand on his own once more. Of course I'm coming. Good night, everyone. Shoto almost laughed at everyone's still gobsmacked expressions as they entered the elevator. Almost. They were in Shoto's room when he finally broke. I'm so sorry, Izuku said, as he sat next to him on the bed. I didn't even realize what I had said. To be fair, Shoto said, throat tight. I would have said the same thing. He can go die. Izuku gave an almost laugh. It was breathy and shaky and made his shoulders tremble like an earthquake. Yeah, I guess you're right. Shoto tried to ignore the tears in the other boy's eyes, but he couldn't. For some reason, that was the straw that broke his back. Great. Crying. He loved crying. He hiccuped slightly, making Izuku's gaze snap to him, and his eyes widen almost comically. And now I've made you cry. It's not your fault, Shoto said, around the lump in his throat, grasping Izuku's hand like a lifeline, even though he couldn't see him past the tears in his eyes. It's not like they wouldn't have found out. It's literally the 2nd week of this stupid thing. I'm surprised it didn't happen already. Are you gonna tell them anything? Izuku asked before he immediately winced. That was blunt. I hate this. But I have to ask, are you just gonna leave it as what you said, or? Shoto sighed shakily. I don't know. You shared a lot with everyone already, right? Despite his tears, Izuku smiled a bit, though it looked more like a grimace. I guess, yeah, they know the basics, just like they do with you now. But I probably know a lot more about you than you know about me. At this point, we should all just do a Q&A, Shoto said, only half joking. We'll all just sit in the classroom and ask each other about our inner demons like a discussion about quirk laws. Izuku laughed weakly, letting his head fall onto Shoto's chest, like he would be safe from their problems there. That would save us some time, for sure. And then, for some god-forsaken reason, Shoto latched his arms around Izuku and began to sob. They know, he found himself saying, vision blurry. They know. They do, Izuku said. He sounded like he was crying too, and his arms were suddenly wrapped tightly around him as well. And I'm so sorry. They won't judge you, though. Promise. They accepted me in my past, so they'll do the same for you. I suppose, Shoto said, suppressing a hiccup. But what if they tell Aizawa, or if it somehow gets back to my father? He felt Izuku freeze below him. That would be very, very not good, that's for sure. The part about your father, not Aizawa. Why on earth would I want Aizawa to know? He didn't mean to sound harsh, but the panic in his chest was crawling up his throat and threatening to drown him, like he was being waterboarded with it by his fears. Kirishima went to Aizawa, and that turned out fine. And if you don't want this to get back to your father, you should tell everyone that. It's not like they can go post it on social media right now, he said with a half-hearted shrug, or go off campus. There's no reason to bring it up. But this quirk won't last forever. Izuku's words hit him right in the gut. They'll eventually be able to talk to their families again. They'll tell one person and all hell could break loose. Yeah, okay, but if I bring it up, they'll ask questions. He almost flinched at the thought. That would be not ideal. Maybe you could put a note in the fridge. Please refrain from ever speaking of Endeavor again. Signed, Shota Todoroki. Shota couldn't help but laugh through his tears. That could work. Izuku was a bit freaked out when Shota started crying. Don't get him wrong, he was 100% ready to support him in all that he had gone through, but Shota didn't usually do feelings. At least to the degree of sobbing and shaking in someone else's lap kind of feelings. That's when it hit him. This quirk wasn't just altering their words, it was altering their emotions. It made so much sense with everything that had happened. Izuku sharing his entire life story with the class, Bakugo finally apologizing, Kirishima breaking down, and now this? It was so obvious now that he had figured it out. It had to have something to do with their true emotions, or what they would feel if they couldn't lie to themselves about how they were feeling. You still could lie to yourself in your head, but your emotions would still be all over the place. That would also explain why Bakugo and Shota confessed their feelings so quickly on that first day. Shota looked up at him. I can hear the gears turning in your head. What are you thinking? Izuku explained to him his new revelation. He watched Shoto's eyes widen before he put his head in his hands. Izuku had probably just blown his mind. Yes, you are blowing my mind. He looked up at him, bewildered. How do you do that? Izuku shrugged, unsure of what to say. There were more important things to focus on now. Practice? I don't think it matters. What matters is we need to tell everyone about this. He thought that the dual-haired boy would readily agree, but an uncertain expression crossed his face instead. Should we, though? He asked. Tell them. Izuku stared. Why wouldn't we? Shota rubbed the back of his neck. He looked down at the ground, deep in thought, for a long time. It wouldn't change anything, he finally said. It would just cause more panic. Aren't we all scared enough without this whole emotion things being thrown in? I guess, Izuku found himself saying. He could see where he was coming from, and this wasn't something they could take lightly. Any new information about this quirk would certainly upset the rest of the class. But maybe we should tell Aizawa and see what he says. We don't even know if we're right. We could all just be hormonal teenagers. Telling Aizawa seems like a good idea, but really, do you think I would be like this if a quirk had nothing to do with it? He wiped the tears off his face and flicked them at Izuku just to prove his point, to which the green-haired boy just snickered. Good point. I, however, seemed completely normal, which is why it took me so long to figure it out. Ain't that the truth? Hey! Shoto found himself next to Izuku when they told Aizawa the next day after class. And Aizawa agreed with Shoto that they shouldn't tell the rest of the class, if only because it was just a hunch and not based on any actual proof. If it ended up coming out, which it probably would, given their situation, it couldn't be helped. But he told them to try and avoid it if possible. It would only cause much more unnecessary grief, since there was pretty much nothing they could do about it. Even if that was the case, Shoto desperately wished it wasn't. Because ever since he came down for breakfast that morning, everyone had been treating him like glass, and it was making him feel like a bug under a microscope. Actually, no, not glass. More like a loose cannon, one that could go off at any moment, and he could tell that they weren't sure if they wanted it to go off or not. He would like nothing more than to tell them about this whole emotions thing and let them forget all about him. Izuku had been eyeing them during their conversation with Aizawa, almost as if he was trying to get him to say something else, which Izuku would never do. Oh no, never. He definitely wouldn't try to goad him into spilling his tragic backstory to their teacher. That was also one thing he desperately missed, sarcasm. He would have really liked to be so sarcastic answering all of his classmates' questions about his past.
It was a good way to deflect, to not let them know that he actually cared about what he was saying. Even if he was still very bad at actually being sarcastic, social interactions were still a bit of a challenge, of course. He had only ever been sarcastic to his father most of his life. It might have made things worse sometimes, but getting that tiny bit of control back was worth it to him. But yeah, he still didn't understand other social norms, which was why, that night at dinner, he was fully unprepared for the storm his classmates were about to bring. Izuku wasn't kidding about the whole honest emotions thing, that was for sure. "Why is your mom in a mental hospital?" Uraraka asked unceremoniously from across the table, before her hands flew to her mouth. Izuku quickly stood up. "Hey, what if we didn't? I'm so sorry," she yelled, also standing up and bowing slightly at him. "I've been trying so hard not to ask, and now I have, and I'm just ruining all this." "You're okay," Shoto said, trying to ease the tension. "You can both sit down." They did, if rather slowly. All chatter had stopped at this point, in favor of staring at the mess unfolding at the middle of the table. Do you still want to know?" he asked quietly. "You already know a lot." Was this how Izuku had felt the other night? If the hand suddenly gripping his own was anything to go by, then yes. It also meant that there was really no point of fighting any longer, especially when he would just be delaying the inevitable. I mean, Uraraka had a bright red face. "If you don't have to tell us anything." She poured boiling water on my face. There, he had said it. She was having a mental breakdown because of my father's abuse. She hated my left side because it looked so much like him. Nobody said a word, and for a moment, all he could hear was the blood rushing to his ears and blood pumping through his veins. That was, of course, before all hell broke loose. Questions assaulted him from all directions, making it impossible to distinguish who was saying what, or what they were even saying. It was too much, too many words, not enough quiet. He almost lifted his hands to cover his ears just to make it all stop. "Everyone shut up!" Bakugo suddenly yelled, slamming his hands on the table, forcing everyone to look at him. "Leave Icy out alone!" "Kachan's right," Izuku said quietly. Eyes shifted to the boy who was now staring sadly at the table, head down so that his hair covered his eyes. "It's my fault you guys even know all this. Don't make it any worse." "It would have come out eventually," Shoto managed to say, squeezing his hand and doing his best to reassure him. "Don't blame yourself, and I was the one that asked her if she really wanted to know, after all." "So that's how you got your scar," Momo said, gripping Jiro's hand so hard her knuckles were white. The other's hand wasn't much better, whose face also looked strangely blank. "Yeah." His throat was almost closing in on itself, which was weird because he knew he wasn't allergic to anything. Maybe he was allergic to emotions, and his quirk would kill him, which honestly wasn't a horrible alternative. "I didn't see her for years after that. My father only really put her in the hospital because she scarred me." He didn't say the words, "hurt me," because Endeavor had done that every single day of his life. "Why is he still a pro hero?" Shinto's voice was dark and had a certain edge to it. "Why is he not in prison?" "Money, mostly." Shoto found himself internally chuckling at the sheer ridiculousness of society. Criminals always thrived at the top, after all. He had a lot of it to throw at all his problems, including how he never bested All Might. It's the reason I'm even here. He hadn't realized he had said that before he looked up and saw all of his classmates staring at him in abject horror. "What do you mean, the reason you're here?" Someone choked out. Shoto sighed. This was going to take a while. Could he knock himself out with his own ice? "I guess I should start at the beginning. Do any of you know what quirk marriages are?" "Isn't that like dog breeding?" Sue said bluntly. "But like with people in powers?" "Sue!" Ida scolded. "Why would..." "Oh," she said, her face turning bright red. I'm sorry, Ribbit." "It's okay," Shoto found himself saying. It really was the same, concept-wise, so he ignored the weird feeling that shot through his chest at the thought. You're not wrong. Most people view it as unethical nowadays, but for the number 2 hero, buying a woman with an ice quirk wouldn't be too much of a problem as long as he kept it under wraps. All he had left to do after that was have a powerful child and train it to become the next number 1 hero from the age of 5. He let his statement, which had pretty much no control over, with the words spilling out of his mouth like vomit, sink in. He couldn't imagine what was going through everyone's heads, but then again, he didn't have to. Everyone was shouting over each other once again. Shoto forcefully remained silent, as they all unwillingly shared their opinions on how horrible and appalling and monstrous that was. Like he wasn't painfully aware of that already. He started thinking about it for too long, because then he started to hate himself on a very unhealthy level. He wasn't sure what made everyone finally calm down. Maybe they just got all the anger out of their system, or perhaps they simply realized he wasn't going to try and talk over them. Maybe the quirk wore off for the time being, since they probably would have stayed silent in the first place if they weren't under the influence of it. He still saw very hateful and somber expressions on most of their faces. They were probably unsatisfied with his lack of an explanation, and he suddenly felt guilty. I'm sorry for being so unhelpful with my words, he said, somewhat awkwardly, trying his best to be sincere. I'm trying not to think of it as much as I can while talking about it. But if y'all really want to know, that's not why we're upset, Ida said, voice full of anger, and maybe even tears. We're angry at the man who hurt you and your family, and we won't ask any more of you. I'm so sorry, Yamomo said suddenly. I was there, and I could have done something. What are you talking about? Shota asked, absolutely bewildered by his friend's unprompted words. Your father hosted some sort of dinner party for pro heroes and other high-status people, and my family was there, and I didn't realize anything was going on. I even saw you. You were just sitting at the table like nothing was wrong. She broke down then, turning her head and burying it in Jiro's shoulder, whose face was still decidedly blank, yet now white as a sheet. Shoto suddenly felt his heart ache at the sight of the strongest girl in the class and his oldest friend falling apart at the seams. It's not your fault. Shoto reached across the table and grabbed her hand, shocking himself at the show of affection. He barely even registered the single fresh tear track on his own face as he stared at the table. He really only noticed when he saw it land in a perfect little droplet on the wood. We were both so young, and none of the adults saw anything either. By that point, I knew how to hide everything pretty well. She squeezed his hand so hard he felt the circulation begin to cut off, but he didn't mind. I'm still so sorry, she choked out, face still hidden. You say he trained you. He even showed us the training room, and I didn't even realize there was blood on the floor. Shoto felt his heart skip a beat at that, but he made sure his face stayed impassive as he tried to reassure her. Yeah, that was probably mine. Or not. This truth quirk was a real kick in the gut sometimes. He felt his stomach lurch when she flinched at his monotonous words, as many others did at the table. Maybe a neutral take on this subject wasn't the best idea if they were going to react in such a way. I know you already know this, Izuku said from next to him, tightening his hold on the hand not occupying Yaomomo's. But I really, really hate your father. I'm aware, Shoto said, but it's not like he ever did it viciously or out of hatred. He was just incredibly harsh in his training. That doesn't mean shit, Bakugo said. All the eyes turned to the boy who was practically seething at the mouth. Whenever adults hurt you, it's not okay, no matter their fucking motivation or whatever. Shoto tilted his head slightly in surprise. That wasn't something he would expect from Bakugo, of all people. You're right. I'm simply trying to let go of the anger that's been weighing me down for so long. Why anyone want to let go of that anger, I'll never know. Shoto's lips quirked upwards at that, because really, it was such a Bakugo thing to say, and it made him feel almost normal, even if for only just a moment. I don't know. Maybe I never will. but at least he never beat me outside of that training room. Yep, he hated this quirk. And maybe those words were the last straw, or maybe they were simply horrible enough on their own, but several of his friends, even people he hardly knew, teared up or visibly started crying once he said them, if they weren't already. Someone choked out. Shoto sighed. This was going to take a while. Could he knock himself out with his own ice? I guess I should start at the beginning. Do any of you know what quirk marriages are?
Isn't that like dog breeding?
Sue said bluntly.
But like with people in powers?
Sue! Ida scolded.
Why would...
Oh, she said, her face turning bright red.
I'm sorry, Ribbit.
It's okay, Shoto found himself saying. It really was the same, concept-wise, so he ignored the weird feeling that shot through his chest at the thought. You're not wrong. Most people view it as unethical nowadays, but for the number 2 hero, buying a woman with an ice quirk wouldn't be too much of a problem as long as he kept it under wraps. All he had left to do after that was have a powerful child and train it to become the next number 1 hero from the age of 5. He let his statement, which had pretty much no control over, with the words spilling out of his mouth like vomit, sink in. He couldn't imagine what was going through everyone's heads, but then again, he didn't have to. Everyone was shouting over each other once again. Shoto forcefully remained silent, as they all unwillingly shared their opinions on how horrible and appalling and monstrous that was. Like he wasn't painfully aware of that already. He started thinking about it for too long, because then he started to hate himself on a very unhealthy level. He wasn't sure what made everyone finally calm down. Maybe they just got all the anger out of their system, or perhaps they simply realized he wasn't going to try and talk over them. Maybe the quirk wore off for the time being, since they probably would have stayed silent in the first place if they weren't under the influence of it. He still saw very hateful and somber expressions on most of their faces. They were probably unsatisfied with his lack of an explanation, and he suddenly felt guilty. I'm sorry for being so unhelpful with my words, he said, somewhat awkwardly, trying his best to be sincere. I'm trying not to think of it as much as I can while talking about it. But if y'all really want to know, that's not why we're upset, Ida said, voice full of anger, and maybe even tears. We're angry at the man who hurt you and your family, and we won't ask any more of you.
I'm so sorry, Yamomo said suddenly. I was there, and I could have done something.
What are you talking about? Shoto asked, absolutely bewildered by his friend's unprompted words.
Your father hosted some sort of dinner party for pro heroes and other high-status people, and my family was there, and I didn't realize anything was going on. I even saw you. You were just sitting at the table like nothing was wrong.
She broke down then, turning her head and burying it in Jiro's shoulder, whose face was still decidedly blank, yet now white as a sheet. Shoto suddenly felt his heart ache at the sight of the strongest girl in the class and his oldest friend falling apart at the seams. It's not your fault. Shoto reached across the table and grabbed her hand, shocking himself at the show of affection. He barely even registered the single fresh tear track on his own face as he stared at the table. He really only noticed when he saw it land in a perfect little droplet on the wood. We were both so young, and none of the adults saw anything either. By that point, I knew how to hide everything pretty well. She squeezed his hand so hard he felt the circulation begin to cut off, but he didn't mind.
I'm still so sorry,
she choked out, face still hidden.
You say he trained you. He even showed us the training room, and I didn't even realize there was blood on the floor.
Shoto felt his heart skip a beat at that, but he made sure his face stayed impassive as he tried to reassure her. Yeah, that was probably mine. Or not. This truth quirk was a real kick in the gut sometimes. He felt his stomach lurch when she flinched at his monotonous words, as many others did at the table. Maybe a neutral take on this subject wasn't the best idea if they were going to react in such a way.
I know you already know this,
Izuku said from next to him, tightening his hold on the hand not occupying Yaomomo's. But I really, really hate your father. I'm aware, Shoto said, but it's not like he ever did it viciously or out of hatred. He was just incredibly harsh in his training. That doesn't mean shit, Bakugo said. All the eyes turned to the boy who was practically seething at the mouth. Whenever adults hurt you, it's not okay, no matter their fucking motivation or whatever. Shoto tilted his head slightly in surprise. That wasn't something he would expect from Bakugo, of all people. You're right. I'm simply trying to let go of the anger that's been weighing me down for so long. Why anyone want to let go of that anger, I'll never know. Shoto's lips quirked upwards at that, because really, it was such a Bakugo thing to say, and it made him feel almost normal, even if for only just a moment. I don't know. Maybe I never will, but at least he never beat me outside of that training room. Yup, he hated this quirk. And maybe those words were the last straw, or maybe they were simply horrible enough on their own, but several of his friends, even people he hardly knew, teared up or visibly started crying once he said them, if they weren't already. Izuku embraced him from the side, and suddenly people were standing up to join in. Uraraka, Ida, Yamamomo, Sue, Kirishima, and he didn't even know who else because he couldn't see past the tears gathering in his eyes. Maybe we should just start the movie night, he said, eventually, through the lump in his throat. He tried to ignore all the thoughts and feelings swirling throughout his entire being, much more in favor of a simple distraction, anything to keep his mouth shut and his classmates from becoming more upset. Yeah, Mina said, with a slight snivel somewhere to his left. And did that mean she was going to be part of this weird hug too? I can set it up, but we're not letting you go. And true to her word, the setup of movie night was drastically different from the previous ones. Shoto found himself dead center, with Uraraka and Izuku at his sides, Yamamomo, Sue, and Mina in front of his legs, and somehow everyone piled onto that same couch. Someone was above him and on top of everything, and he was pretty sure that it was Tokiyami, based on the feather that fell in his lap. Izuku was curled into his side, like he wanted Shoto to hold him and never let go. He happily obliged, putting an arm across him and letting Izuku rest his head on his chest. Love you, the greenette whispered next to his heart, making him melt. His boyfriend was certainly a badass on the field, but damn if he wasn't adorable like this. Love you too, he whispered right back. He hardly paid attention in the movie, too content in the soaking in the warmth of everyone around him. When was the last time he had ever received this much affection? He wasn't entirely sure he had it ever at all. And man, wasn't it wonderful. Izuku was a great hugger, but there was just something different about having all his close friends near him. You're mumbling, Izuku mumbled into his chest. That's usually my thing. Shoto found himself smiling softly. I guess I'm just thinking about how much I appreciate all of this, I guess. He said it a bit louder so that Izuku could hear him better, but he guessed he was just a bad whisperer. Several people turned and gushed about how amazing he was and how much they loved him. Thanks, guys, he said, fighting against the growing blush on his cheeks. I'm not used to this kind of affection. Someone paused the movie, indicating that once again the attention was back on him. And damn it, this movie night was supposed to be distraction so he didn't further upset his friends. Hey, Todoroki? Kirishima whispered. Shoto looked over to see him lower the remote, meaning he had been the one to pause the action sequence they were now looking at. Can I ask you something about what you said earlier? Shoto felt a heavy weight settle in his chest, but he nonetheless nodded. Sure. You said Endeavor was responsible for your brother's death. Do you ever do anything like this with him? Or other siblings, if you have them? I just hate the idea of you being alone, like you're implying. And wow, Shoto was really not ready for the roller coaster of emotions that question took him on. Once his head stopped spinning, which couldn't have been longer than a few seconds, since no one looked overly concerned, he took a deep breath and answered, No, I never really spent time with any of my siblings. Was there
Was there an age gap? Sue asked sadly, and Shoto was once again reminded of her very large family that she had taken care of for so long. Did you not get along? He almost smiled at the irony of her question. I don't know how we would have gotten on. I wasn't allowed to see them. Why not? Uraka asked angrily. Was isolation Endeavor's idea of good hero material making? He shrugged. He didn't bother saying that it was exactly what Endeavor thought, since she seemed to realize it second after that. He held up a hand to keep her from apologizing. It's fine. They weren't allowed to see me because I was his masterpiece and lived in a different world than them. But how did your brother die? Kaminari asked before turning red. Oh crap. His quirk killed him, Shota said, in lieu of delaying the inevitable. He watched as several people blanched back in shock at his bluntness, even with the truth quirk. Or it might have just been how horrible the statement itself was. My father tried several times before me to create a perfect mix of ice and fire. My brother got my father's flames and my mother's heat tolerance. It was a deadly combination. He felt something in his chest begin to shake, but he did his best to ignore it. He hardly even knew Toya. So what right did he have to grieve? I'm sorry, Ida said, and Shoto turned to look and felt his heart twinge at the sight of tears on his face. Losing a brother, I could never imagine how painful that must have been. I barely knew him. Shoto thought the words would bring comfort to him, but they did the opposite. He just began to shake harder, and Nezuko and Uraka both gripped his hands lightly. I never got to know him. He was horrified when a sob started to build up in his throat. I don't even know how it happened. No one ever told me. I just found out at the dinner table and was expected to show up for evening training like usual. He couldn't take it anymore. Tears escaped his eyes like his boyfriends did on any other day. Izuku had to have been right about the emotions thing. He never let himself feel this way before about what happened. He'd always pushed it back to the back of his mind, ignored it, because there were more important things to focus on. But now that he was being forced to accept the reality that he never knew his siblings or had any sort of normal childhood. Am I broken? He heard himself whisper. Probably. Izuku was always one for waterworks, and he definitely wasn't shying away from that now. His words surprised Shoto, although they probably shouldn't have. He was under this damn truth quirk after all. But we all are. And that was it, wasn't it? They were all just broken pieces of their upbringings, shoved together into some semblance of a functioning human being. And wasn't that how everybody existed, if you really thought about it? Nobody was whole. Nobody was untouched by the hands of grief. Some people were just better at hiding it than others. And he was usually better at it than this. But give him a break. He was emotionally screwed over by the actions of a toddler at the moment. Sue him. Which is probably why he asked his next question. Something he would never say under the threat of death normally. Am I worth it to you guys? Or to you, Izuku? Of course you are, his boyfriend said without a hint of hesitation. Small murmurs of agreement could be heard, like they knew they were intruding on a moment. But for now, he had his eyes just on the boy in his arms. You always have been, just like you said I was. Why else would I literally shatter myself? Shoto felt himself nod distantly as silent tears continued to roll down his face. That's a fair point. Why isn't Endeavor still a hero? Uraka suddenly asked. I know you said money was an issue, but if all of your siblings told the authorities, wouldn't at least something happen? Yeah, Shoto would be discredited as a hero before his career even began, Izuku said, before nonchalantly adding, that's why we're playing the long game. Everyone seemed to freeze at his words, and at the cool edge they held, but it was unsettling to hear in Izuku's voice. But Shoto had to admit, it sounded kind of hot. He was not blushing. Definitely not. Long game? Someone asked. And oh man, that was a mistake, based on the evil glint in Izuku's eyes.
Yes, the long game that will put Endeavor in jail for life when Shoto's a pro hero with credibility and we both pull over to the Hero Commission. I don't want to move, so I'm not getting the binders from my room, but I have it all memorized anyway. Ask away. Shoto smiled as Izuku answered everyone's questions about how he would be taking down Endeavor, like he couldn't use a paperclip against him and win if he had enough planning time. He loved the green-haired, slightly crazy dork he now called a boyfriend, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Getting rid of his Endeavor was just a bonus. Hello, ladies and gents, and those whose gender is a little bent. I'm back. So, I'm back from my impromptu break, I guess. I was grounded because I had a self-harm relapse. And my parents did not like that very much, so they grounded me. Anyways, I am ungrounded now. I do not think I will still be, posting consistently because I have exams, and those are really kicking my butt very hard. Anyways, plans for the future, I'm planning on finishing, if we're being honest, in one, go, not one go, but, consistently set up the chapters and finish them before doing, one-shots or anything else. And after I finish the series, I think I'm going to be staying away from series for a little bit, because this is taking a while. I think I'm just going to stick to one-shots and two-shots for a little bit. And also those fics that are, fics, but, they have different parts that are, separate fics. So the series that have multiple fics in a series, but probably mostly the ones that could be read as standalone. And then I will be adding those to the one-shot and two-shot Podfic playlist, and then they will also get their own playlist if it's part of a series, in case you want to read it from the first story to the last story. But yeah, anyways, hope you guys are having a great day. Drink some water, eat some food. Coffee does not count as a meal. And I'll see you guys next time.
Ordered the Among Us potion from the dark web.